All right, nicely done. It looks like we're live on YouTube. No participants yet, but we're still 5 minutes till the hour. Hi there, Brett. Good to see you.
Hi, Sophie.
Hi there, Fred. How are you?
Pretty good. Gonna go off camera here for a little bit.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Let's see. Welcome, Ezra. I see you now. Joel, I see you as well. We said hello to Dan earlier, and Jim. Move you around.
Nice to see you, Sophie.
Yeah. How's everyone doing on this fine February day?
Well, we were supposed to have a massive snowstorm in the Northeast, and it turned into about 3 flakes. So,
Yeah. In Boston, New York, on the other hand, I hear they've gotten quite the snow dump.
yeah, they got socked.
Yeah. My sister's due with her first baby this week, and I was like, the baby can't. She's in Brooklyn, and we're like, she can't go into labor in the middle of a snowstorm. So let's hope they're holding off.
Well, interesting you should say that. My daughter is having a baby this week as well.
Oh
It's
my
actually
goodness.
scheduled for Friday, but yes, they were a little worried if she goes into labor, they'd have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, congrats to you. That's exciting.
Thank you. First grandchild.
Oh, that's extra exciting then.
I read recently that being a grandparent is the one part of life that isn't overrated.
I think my parents would agree, but I won't quote them.
I can
Great.
vouch for it. And I'm sorely tempted to actually post a picture of my twin grandchildren in their preschool Valentine best, but I won't.
Oh, Dan, you're always welcome. And Katie, I did see just a member of your family creep across the screen. I saw a cat. Who is the cat?
Yes, that's Bear Cat. He's a very needy cat, so he might make some more appearances.
You know, there's always room for one more pet in the RPAG, I think.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, so let's see. You all are coming in. We have public counsel represented. I'm just gonna update your names so that council. Anyone else? There's Eliza's joining, and then Froy is joining. Great, everyone's trickling in. Summer is here. Very good. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Very good. I think this is a critical mass. A few other RPEG members might be trickling in as we get going here today, but it's really good to see all of you. And thank you for making time for this substantive meeting. Oh, good. John is joining us here. I'll add him. For this substantive meeting, there's a lot of good topics. And as always, just kind of keep the conversation going. You can ask questions as we move along. And you can go to the next slide. So a reminder for those who are joining the webinar but are not RPAG members, the raise hand feature will be turned off until we do public comments, and the Q&A feature is turned off during the meeting as well. If you're an RPAG member, there is the chat feature available to you. And if closed captionings help you, you can turn those on. Next slide. So February, very aptly with Valentine's Day in mind, is Healthy Heart Month. And so just some healthy steps from the CDC about managing your risk factors for heart disease and working with some sort of healthcare professional, eating healthy, get active, lower stress, quit smoking, all the things that are probably easier said than done. And you can find out more at this URL. So next slide. So just as always, my request is that you engage constructively with each other. I know many of you need to confer with your colleagues before or after the meeting, so that's what the feedback form is for. So Pauline, if you could just drop the link to that in the chat. And for those of you who are members of the public, after PSE concludes its presentation dialogue, there will be about 10 minutes at the end for your comments, and we look forward to those. Next slide. So here's our agenda for today. Philip will kick us off with just recapping the feedback that you all have heard. We're going to turn to Corey for kind of a continued conversation about what equity looks like in delivery system planning, then turn to Ryan about hosting capacity map overview. We might be able to get to that break a little bit earlier if Ryan said his portion may not be the full 40 minutes, but we will take a break because this is a long meeting. And then the last portion of the meeting is Jen and Philip are going to wrap up with the decarbonization scenarios in the IRP. So Pauline, thank you for dropping the agenda in the chat. And if you could also just drop the slide link in the chat too. These are all on PSE's website. The other thing I wanted to note is in your slide deck on the last page is a glossary of terms. This is helpful for you all as RPEG members, but any of the participants watching at home can refer to that as we're moving through these topics. The other thing that's kind of new to this meeting in particular is we heard from an RPAG member that it would be helpful to really hone in on what PSE is asking of you for each of these topics. Are they asking for your opinion? Are they just giving you information? So we're going to anchor each presentation with that as well. So next slide. I mentioned our speakers. They can introduce themselves as they get going, but today is all PSE speakers, no consultants today. Next slide. So with that, I will turn it over to Philip to do a recap of what he's been hearing or what PSE has heard since the last time you all met. Go ahead, Philip.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Sophie. And thank you all for joining us. Sophie, I'm not sure in your safety moment there, I'm not sure reducing stress is quite what a IRP guy at a combo utility these days is doing, right? There's plenty of difficult things to figure out. So, but fortunately, we have you all here to help us sort through some things. So let's go to the next slide. Just wanted to hit a couple of the feedback forms real briefly. The feedback forms are all posted on our website, so you can see all the details of the comments and our responses. What we heard in the 12th meeting on December 12th, definitely some concerns about hydrogen. I think there have been plenty of concerns expressed about renewable natural gas as well. Totally understand those concerns. If these wind up being viable alternatives, really economically viable and commercially available, then we have to look at them, right? So we're going to continue to look at them in this IRP and in the future until it becomes apparent that they're either not viable or not cost effective. Then some feedback on the better coordination between electric and gas planning and IRP and CEIP. We're absolutely moving in that direction. Looking forward to at some point really getting into an integrated system plan approach. Not quite there yet, but we're going that direction. Also there, the gas and electric scenario and the themes, all that. We're talking today about the electrification scenarios that we'll be looking at. Jen will walk us through some of that stuff, and the importance of equity in the 25 IRP. We're going to be talking about that a little bit on the distribution planning side with Corey. Let's go to the next slide. Looking at the modeling a negative gas customer growth scenario, we'll be talking about those today, and what that winds up looking like. Once again, understand the concerns about hydrogen and nuclear, lithium ion batteries versus sodium ion batteries. That was certainly some good advice. Then some comments on the EV forecast. What I'd say about the EV forecast is there's a lot of uncertainty with how EVs are going to roll out. There's I don't know if the pun maybe was intended. How are EVs going to roll out, and how are different types of customers going to be charging their vehicles? Right? It's probably not going to be homogeneous. Customers buying EVs this year may not have the same usage patterns or charging patterns of those that are buying EVs in 5 years. Right. So this is going to be really dynamic over time for sure. Once again, I understand concerns about the gas load forecast, and we'll be talking about that again a little bit here. Yeah.
Philip, I see Joel's hand. Go ahead, Joel.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, I just wanted to check in on the first bullet under the public feedback included heading. I'm trying to remember how the conversation went during the January 12th meeting, but I think, at least from my perspective, at least staff sort of feedback was more along the lines of making sure that the gas customer account and that growth scenario, especially in the base forecast, are grounded sort of in what PSE is seeing actually happening. Not necessarily that is a negative trend, but basing it on just having a basis for that. So anyway, I don't know if this is maybe talking about feedback from other groups, but I just wanted to clarify that point, at least from staff's perspective.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Joel. And, I think that, since, we're not seeing big reductions in number of customers. In fact, we still have positive customer growth, right? We are seeing that. We have been seeing that. Not as much as we forecasted a few years ago, that's for sure. But we are still seeing some positive customer growth. And we'll certainly get better and smarter at being able to identify how those things are changing over time. But the number of customers starts to get to be important in very, very specific types of analysis, right? If it's an infill customer, right, in the middle of my block, right? In fact, I have this customer or a neighbor down the street, a little 1960s house, tore it down. They're building this, I don't know, looks like a 4,000 square foot house. Don't know if they're going to have gas there. I'm excited to talk to them and find out just what they're choosing to do. But they may keep a gas fireplace and they may keep gas cooking, right? They may not. But what I can say is that we are definitely reflecting what's been happening in the past here with the trends. So is the volume going down or going up, right? Are peaks going down or are they going up? Because customers may be leaving the system. Maybe customers are just replacing a furnace and they're keeping their other appliances. Maybe they keep their water heater until that burns out and then they replace with an electric water heater. Don't know. But because we have in our econometrics all the data going in, we're forecasting the use and the peaks, right? The use at peaks is really based on what's been happening, right? So those trends are kind of baked into the numbers. But we definitely agree that we want to have a good forecast of customer counts as well, not just the load and not just the peaks. So definitely appreciate that, Joel.
Great. Thanks for that, Joel. All right, Philip, any other topics you wanted to cover on this slide?
Nope, I don't
Okay.
think so. Okay, thank you.
Are there feedback, questions from everyone before we move along? Okay, well, Corey, you're on deck. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So this topic is about equity and delivery system planning and investment decision optimization tool, I think is called IDOT. And if you can go to the next slide, I'll just focus us here. So PSE is hoping you all will lean in for this one. This is the spectrum of public involvement or stakeholder engagement. And PSE is hoping to really involve you in this conversation about equity and delivery system planning and hoping to kind of collaborate with you on some pieces. So feedback, ideas, questions, please keep them coming as Corey gets us going. So go ahead, Corey.
Thanks, Sophie. I'm Corey Corbett. I'm one of the managers in the system planning organization at PSE. And as Sophie mentioned, I'm here to talk about IDOT, or Investment Decision Optimization Tool, and how equity has been incorporated into that tool. I'll also be providing some background on our delivery system planning process and defining what our energy delivery system is, as well as talking about some next steps at the end where would like some input from the RPAG. So next slide, Sophie. So just as background, this is related to the 2022 general rate case. There's a condition related to IDOT specifically about developing new benefits and costs related to equity and incorporating that into the IDOT tool. Also part of that condition has PSE engaging with our equity advisory group, RPAG, and customers to get input on that incorporation of equity into IDOT. Previously, we've had some discussions with our EAG, our equity advisory group, in 2022 and 2023. We also, back in November, had a more broad public meeting talking about our delivery system planning process. So that's background. I see a question. I don't know the protocol if I should respond as they come up, or okay.
Yeah, go for it, Corey. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a slide I have. I'll be talking about IDOT. IDOT is more our generic term for our decision process. We are using a specific software, and I'll provide a little more detail on that when the slide pops up. So next slide, Sophie. So first off, I just wanted to define energy delivery system to help define delivery system planning and how that connects into some of our infrastructure construction processes. So when we say energy delivery system, we're talking about really all the infrastructure between the generation source and customer site. So that's, transmission lines, substations, distribution lines, service lines, transformers, and now distributed energy resources. When we talk about energy delivery system, I have a slide on the next one that talks about natural gas, but it's really, as I mentioned, all the infrastructure, and it's focused on looking at local circuits, neighborhoods, and cities, and the needs that need to happen from a infrastructure standpoint to maintain reliability, capacity, and safety for our customers. Next slide. And yeah, as I mentioned, energy delivery system is also natural gas. The processes that I talk about with IDOT and delivery system planning apply to both delivery systems. And with the natural gas system, obviously there's different infrastructure that's involved where we're dealing with pipeline regulators and a little bit different system, but nevertheless it still delivers energy to our customers. Next slide. And just as some background before I get into the delivery system planning process, just wanted to talk about how delivery system planning fits into the overall construction of infrastructure. So within delivery system planning, that's kind of the initial process that kicks off the handoff that would either go into one of two buckets of investments. One are more programmatic type of investments. So you can think of those as smaller projects where we have a lot of assets on our system. One example program that we have is our pole remediation or pole inspection and remediation program. So with that program, we're looking to extend the life of our poles on our system. Another example of a program would be our cable remediation program. So there's a type of cable we have on our system called high molecular weight cable, which can be prone to reliability issues. And so we have a program to remediate a certain number of miles or a certain number of feet in a year. And then on the gas system, we have a pipeline replacement program that's focused on replacing DuPont pipe, which has some known issues. With major projects, they're a little different, where that might be a large transmission line. It may be a new substation project that the planning process identifies a need and potential solutions for. In both programmatic as well as major project investments, those get handed over ultimately for construction to our project delivery organization. There's two groups within project delivery. One's infrastructure program management. They handle the programmatic investments. And then there's the major projects team that handles the larger scale projects that I mentioned around substations or transmission. Within the construction lifecycle, there's several stages. Delivery system planning is on that initiation stage as the sponsor of the project. It then goes over to the more detailed implementation planning, which involves much more detailed scope, siting of the project schedule, and various design needs for the project. It then goes into the detailed design stage where both the 60%, 90%, and final designs happen with appropriate approvals. And then from that design stage moves into construction, commissioning, and testing to actually get the infrastructure completed. And then the final stages are around closing the project out, ensuring that as-builts are created and project documentation is archived. I see a hand, Joel.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering where non-wires and non-pipes alternatives, where the assessment of those as an alternative to some of these larger projects would fall in. Does that fall under programs, your energy efficiency or demand response programs, or is that separate from this framework?
That's a great question, and it actually tees up my next slide a little bit. So that's maybe a sub process within the delivery system planning process, where part of it is looking at solutions to projects, and that includes non-wire and non-pipe alternatives as part of that solutions process. And then the programs here are much more around infrastructure types of programs. So we make, programmatic types of investment where there's similar types of assets and maybe known vintages of equipment that may be more, cause reliability issues that we look to proactively replace on our system as various needs require that. But yeah, my next slide, I'll be talking a little bit about how non-wires, non-pipes fits into delivery system planning. So yeah, if there's no other questions on this slide, I'll switch over to my next slide. So next slide, Sophie. Yeah, so again, good question on how does non-wire, non-pipe fit in, and I'll try to address that. Within our overall delivery system planning, which again, that's the front end of this whole construction process that, kind of initiates the need for a project, there's a number of planning triggers that may determine the need for a potential project or an investment that would go into a programmatic type of investment. Those might be safety and health, might be around equity advancement, could be around load growth on our system, might be around if there's reliability or outages in an area. To assess, whether one of those triggers has happened, there's a large amount of data that's available to the planning organization, both from, customer programs, the IRP, load forecast, various modeling software that the planning organization uses. But the general step, if one of those triggers happens, is the planner does a system evaluation to look at what's going on. The next in that process is identifying what needs need to be addressed for the project. So if there's like reliability issues, what or a particular component is causing issues, the needs assessment is really looking at what needs do we need to address as part of a project. After the needs are well known, then it goes into this alternatives and recommended solution stage. So that's where non-wires alternatives or non-wire or non-pipe alternatives would come into play and be part of that process, in addition to looking at wired or pipe solutions. And so there's both a benefit cost, there's a benefit cost analysis that happens at a portfolio level, but also can happen at an individual project level to assess relative benefits and costs of looking at the different options. Within this delivery system planning process, and this is maybe where I'll shift into talking about IDOT, is there's an optimization step. So within the overall delivery system planning process, there might be several hundred projects that are evaluated for a given year. And there needs to be a process to be able to optimize all of those investments based upon a budget or based upon some constraint. And then after this optimization project happens, or optimization process happens, that's when a portfolio of projects is developed and then handed over in either that programmatic or major project bucket over to our project delivery organization for construction. I see a question
from Jim
Jim?
over there. Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Thanks for this
overview is helpful. I suspect you'll touch on this a little bit more, but you mentioned the benefit cost analysis that you do when deciding between non-pipe, non-wire alternatives and the infrastructure projects. I imagine that's sort of built into the portfolio optimization that you're going to discuss, I think, now. But any additional details that PSE might be able to share or materials that could shed light on just sort of the process and what those benefit cost analyses entail, specifically as it relates to considering the non-pipe and non-wire alternatives. I think that could be helpful for the RPAG members and for the public.
Yeah, I'll do my best on that. I don't know that I went deep on non-wire alternatives, non-pipe alternatives. The material I prepared might be a level up, but I'll do my best to address it within the presentation and then see what additional information I may be able to provide as follow-up.
Great. Thanks, Corey. And thanks for the question, Jim. So I see a question in the chat. I'm going to read it aloud because there are some participants who are just joining by phone. So Joel wrote, I see load growth on slide 16. Given Philip's comments earlier regarding gas load or customer decreases, has PSE evaluated the potential need for load reduction delivery system planning triggers? Thoughts on that, Corey?
I know within our gas investments, we've looked at more specific local areas where load growth is happening. And we've also looked at more reliability related to that load growth as the trigger, as opposed to more system-wide load growth. On the electric side, there's been much more load growth that's caused issues with service transformers or a lot of different capacity investments we're looking to make. I'm maybe fumbling a little bit on my response to you. I'm maybe wanting to look at the question to just make sure I addressed it. I don't feel like I did completely.
So I think, Joel, was that green, but the kind of teal box you have with planning triggers. I think the question was, would load reduction ever be something to kickstart a process? And Corey, it's fine if you want to just write back in the feedback report if we're putting you on the spot now.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm able to fully answer that, Joel.
Great. So just Emily is our note taker. Just flag that question for the feedback report. David, I see you. Yeah, I see you up here. Go ahead, Dave. Yeah.
I'll just jump in real quickly on this and answer Joel's question. I think could load reduction be a trigger? It certainly can at some point in the future, but at this point we're not there. As Philip was talking earlier, we're still seeing customer additions. We still have constrained portions of our gas delivery system where we're focusing on non-pipe alternatives and how to avoid the need to build additional gas pipeline capacity. So we haven't turned that corner yet of seeing load reduction create system planning needs on the gas system. But certainly as we advance through our decarbonization and clean energy transformation, that certainly can be a consideration. I think will be a consideration in the future.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you jumping in. Okay, Corey, back to you. Were you wrapped up with this slide, or should we just pause to see if anyone else has questions? There was a lot of content here.
Yeah, maybe a slight pause, and then if there's not any questions, then we can move to the next slide.
Yeah. Questions or comments about slide 16 here? Okay, we can always go back. So Corey, yeah, carry on.
All right, so next slide. Yeah, so IDOT, again, this is our investment decision optimization tool. I know there was a question earlier about whether that's PSE specific term or if it's a specific software. It's our generic term for our investment decision tool. It's been several different software platforms over the years. Currently, it's PowerPlan's asset investment optimization module. It's a benefit cost tool that helps us optimize our portfolio of projects and programs. It's also variable value attribute based. So you can optimize on, you can look at kind of multiple benefits that accrue as part of a project. As I mentioned, it also helps us optimize across the portfolio. So, again, that delivery system planning process, although it's, seems like a pretty straightforward flow chart, there's, hundreds of projects that get developed or identified through a year that have to get weighted by, previously by just benefit cost. Now we've incorporated equity into that process, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail. But IDOT allows us to optimize this portfolio. It also allows on individual projects. This is where non-wire, non-pipe, as well as larger major projects come into play. You can look at the benefit cost, or you can look at the benefit cost across various alternatives that you're looking at and weight that. I think that's all I want to say on this slide, was just teeing up that it's our generic term for our optimization process, but we are using a specific product from PowerPlan now. The next slide talks a little bit about some of the elements that go into the benefit cost. So next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, IDOT's a benefit cost tool that helps us optimize our portfolio. Prior to 2023, it was strictly benefit cost analysis. Within the 5 categories I have listed, there's actually some sub-elements. So costs are not only the project costs, but whether the project provides cost savings. Within health, safety, and environment, that's both public, customer, and worker safety. Within customer satisfaction, that's outages or reliability, as well as unmet energy related to capacity projects. Interested parties are, a combination of a number of things, but could be regulations, permitting, or public feedback. And then platform success is really around new learnings, innovation, and flexibility that a project may provide. So that may be something that, like our grid modernization team that's focused on new technology may want to learn as part of the project. Next slide. As part of our engagements that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation with the Equity Advisory Group last year, we made some enhancements to IDOT that not only looks at benefit cost analysis, but also incorporates equity. To do that, we leveraged some of the customer benefit indicators from the Clean Energy Implementation Plan, as well as some of the named community data from the CEIP to be able to weight on a qualitative manner. So right now we score a project, whether it's in a named community, whether it has one of the CBIs that benefit that named community on a qualitative basis. So it's just a yes/no answer, and there's a total score that happens based upon a total equity score that happens based upon how those benefits are scored, as well as whether it's in or not in a named community. This methodology aligns with just distributional equity analysis, which is a methodology that's being piloted with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, as well as PSE and our energy equity team and renewables team is looking at a specific program to demo that, but it kind of spells out a best practice of looking at benefit cost analysis and looking at equity separately to be able to direct benefits to a named community. And the process also allows us to set up a minimum threshold where we can run and we can basically run our portfolio of projects to ensure that a specific equity benefit occurs, that a certain percentage of benefits flow to named communities. Although with our work last year, we did not put that constraint into the system. We just ran the portfolio based upon the benefit cost analysis as well as the equity framework that was established. I might pause if there's any questions, or I maybe saw some chats popping up.
Yeah. Questions or comments so far before Corey talks a little bit more about the approach? Yeah, Lauren, go ahead.
So Corey, I apologize if I misheard this. I just wanted to clarify the scoring is both based on the sort of benefits achieved from the project as well as the project's location, right? I mean, I think it's less interesting in some cases whether a project is like located in a specific community, whether versus whether like the energy and non-energy benefits of that project benefit those named communities. So I'm curious if you could just kind of parse that a little bit more for me, would be helpful.
Yes, the benefits do flow to the named community. So that's part of the methodology. In terms of the scoring, though, the equity piece is done outside of that to provide the locational aspect of it. Whether there's a like a reliability benefit, that's maybe more in the benefit cost analysis. But if there's the directionality of it, that's where the equity part of it comes into play, whether is it in a named community or not, and then are there CBIs that are benefiting that named community. And this methodology is basically how we determine whether those benefits are flowing back to that named community as part of the project. So don't feel like I completely answered your question. But
Did that, Lauren?
I think that was helpful. I feel like I probably just need to look into this a little bit more to better understand how the how the CBIs are or are not influencing. But maybe you'll get into that a little bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, and feel free, later on in the meeting, we can take another pause and you can ask or just use the feedback form. So, okay, Jim, go ahead, please.
Thanks. Yeah, and in a similar vein to Lauren's question, I was curious, as much information as Puget is able to share about the specific variables that you're optimizing for in these analyses and sort of the relative weights and how they interact with each other. I think that would be helpful. I mean, this conceptual overview is very helpful, but like getting a grasp on sort of the specifics of how these factors are implemented and your optimization would be, I think, very helpful. And I've written up a question to that effect, which I'll just put it in the chat so you have it written down.
Corey, is that something you could speak to now, or do we want to respond in writing at some point or at a future meeting? Yeah.
I think we could respond at a future meeting. We could go into a deeper level, or we could provide feedback on that. I think the way I structured this was a little higher level. So if you want to get into that, I think it would take a little more explanation.
Great. Emily, just flag that for a future meeting, which is kind of a more parsed out view into how IDOT is structured. Great. I saw John Allis's hand for a brief moment and then it disappeared. You're good, John? Okay, beautiful. Okay,
but
Corey,
I would say we are optimizing based upon benefit cost, and then we're ensuring that a certain percentage of that investment is in named communities, and those benefits do flow back to the named communities.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, a future meeting, we can peek under the hood a little bit more. All right, Corey, next slide.
Could I just ask a just a clarifying follow-up? You say optimizing based on benefit cost. I guess I take that to mean that these factors on the left side of the screen are sort of monetized in some way. And I guess a version of my question is,
yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue and I'll respond to your full question.
Just like, I think any information you could provide about like the factors that are used to monetize those or that feed into the benefit cost analysis would be really helpful.
Sure. The factors on the left are monetized, so they come back to a net present value. The factors on the right are not monetized. They're really a yes/no question, and we optimize on the benefit cost analysis, and then we use the right part to be able to direct a certain percentage of a benefit to named communities. And I did see a question come through. I do have a slide, a couple slides forward that talks about the percentage of benefit, and I might wait to answer that until I get to that slide.
Okay, well, Corey, do you want to keep moving and then?
Yeah,
get to
we'll
those
keep moving.
slides?
Yeah, and really, this was our initial equity related approach. So really our guiding objectives was to have something in place in 2023. Really wanted to start something, straightforward and transparent at first, and then know that we were implementing this with a continuous improvement mindset. So it wasn't perfect, but we wanted to engage with our equity advisory group to get input on the direction. And really the approach was to leverage those customer benefit indicators first, engage with external entities, as I mentioned, the equity advisory group last year, and now the RPAG this year, and then iterate that process as needed based upon that feedback. Next slide.
Corey, well, I'm just realizing, yeah. Okay, you got it all figured out with Megan. Great. Keep going then.
Yeah, so go ahead to the next slide, and then I think I can answer that question. So one thing that I maybe didn't mention about the delivery system planning process is that typically we're several years in advance of construction happening. So the work we did in 2023 was to put together our portfolio of work for 2025 and 2026 construction. So out of the updates that were done to IDOT last year, 38% of the benefit went to named communities, and then 62% of the benefits, were PSE service wide. Based upon the engagement work we did last year, really the direction we headed was just making sure that the benefits from projects went to named communities, that we were optimizing the portfolio where there was a minimum benefit for named communities. In terms of how we applied it, as I mentioned, we did that benefit cost analysis separately from the equity to make sure that we got a minimum percentage of benefit in named communities. And then yeah, I guess I lost my track there. I saw a message come through, but this new methodology allowed us for 2025 and 2026 to basically have a percentage of the benefits go to named communities, and that was based upon engagement work that we did in 2023 to set up this initial methodology. So I think I may have answered Megan's questions.
Megan, you're good? Great. That sounds good.
All right. I think next slide. One other engagement we did last year related to equity was piloted early community engagement. So within the overall infrastructure construction cycle that I mentioned, customer engagement is part of that process. However, it's typically been later on in that process as we are later on with maybe more specific designs or schedules. With the work we did last year was really to use information to inform the needs of a project as well as potential solutions for a project. In 2023, we looked at the Lake Young's Maple Valley area for a reliability project for a named community, and really started with online surveys to gather information from customers, we engaged in phone conversations and in-person meetings. And then we incorporated that feedback into the project needs. So the characteristics of this part of our service territory is a little more rural. So we found that actually a number of customers already had backup generation in the event of outages. We also found that a number of customers had livestock or animals, and they were pretty impacted by outages. A number of customers had irrigation systems for their fields for their animals, and during outages, needed to have backup systems in order to maintain that. So from this community engagement work, we're further looking to be able to incorporate that into the IDOT process to inform not only the needs of a project, but potential solutions to projects.
Yeah. Corey, let's just pause for a second because I saw a question come in from Froy in the chat, and I'll just read it aloud for people on the phone. So Froy asked, could you give us an example without going into naming the named community about how a project benefits a named community versus the PSE territory overall? Like this project, which is a water heater exchange, benefits the community, while new cables or open rebates for everyone benefits the whole territory. Any thoughts off the bat on that, Corey, or phone a friend?
Yeah, there's a few examples. We're actually in the 2025 or actually in the 2026 portfolio. We funded a few projects that were in named communities that may not have met the benefit cost threshold. So there was a transmission project for reliability that benefited a named community. There was a tree wire project for a local distribution system to a named community. There's also a dissolved gas monitor project that is a monitoring device to monitor substation health that what move forward that serves a named community. So more around a particular project that has a benefit to a named community and maybe prioritizing that if the benefit cost ratio might not have otherwise funded kind of through our traditional process.
Thanks for that, Corey. I want to make sure we leave time for your kind of consult or involved question that comes up on your next slide, but any other clarifying questions? Scanning the chat. Yeah, Joel, please.
Yeah, it's actually on the previous slide. I was wondering, I saw the language of the lower right, I guess the second bullet on that side, assessed equity separate from benefit cost analysis to ensure achievement of desired targets. Can you talk a little more about the desired targets that you're looking to achieve there?
I think we tried to ensure that the minimum thresholds that were in the CEIP were met. So although these weren't maybe energy efficiency or distributed energy resource programs, we were trying to ensure that at least 30% of the portfolio benefited named communities.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was wondering if that was the target. And being that those are minimum designations, was there any discussion of what of achieving? I guess you did it. It looks like you are planning to achieve higher than that. So at least in the plan, 30% was kind of where PSE set the bar. Is that right?
With this iteration, yeah, we wanted to ensure that at least 30% were met, but we did just run our model. There is a possibility that we can do a constraint based upon equity where we would, kind of force the optimization model to hit a specific threshold. With how we ran it this year, we ran it to see what the results were, and we met at least 30%, and so we kept the results as is. But in the specific examples that I gave, we can overwrite certain projects if it does have an equity benefit, for specific projects. So yeah, this year we were shooting for at least 30% of the benefit went to named communities.
Thanks.
Thanks for that, Corey. All right, let's go to the next slide so we can start that discussion a little bit more. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, so this is the last slide. Do you recommend other considerations as we evolve our delivery system planning process? And then kind of within the context of what I just shared, and I think Ryan will be talking about some of our improved delivery system planning tools when he talks about hosting capacity analysis. We are planning to continue to evolve IDOT based upon this engagement work and continue to evolve it. As I mentioned, what we did last year for 2023 was for our 25 and 26 portfolio. So we're looking to continue to evolve it for the 2027 portfolio. And then the community engagement work that I mentioned, we're looking to continue to evolve that process, that the early community engagement to inform the needs of projects as well. So yeah, looking for feedback.
Great, thanks for that. So I see Lauren and then Fred. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, maybe I'm missing something, but I feel like it would be helpful for us to understand how the delivery system planning fits into the overall, integrated resource plan. Presumably, I think we would expect for this tool to be able to provide some of the resource needs that are, that are demonstrated through the overall planning process. We would want to see like investments that are made on the customer side of the meter, investments that are made kind of at the distribution system level to meet some of the, like, let's say system peaking needs that Puget's identifying through the planning process. So I'm just a little bit unsure if this is like fully integrated with the overall plan, or if it's just like a separate tool that helps PSE sort of make a business case for its distribution system investments, like in a rate case or whatever. I'm not totally sure I understand how the delivery system planning fits into the overall planning.
Thanks for that question. And other folks in PSE, this could be a full team answer, because I know some of you have thought about this before. So Corey, do you want to start, or should I turn to, for example, Philip? I think I see him come out on screen. Yeah,
certainly can have Philip talk about it. I think within Ryan's slides that he'll be presenting, he talks a little bit about the connection points that are currently there between the IRP and delivery system planning and how that's evolving to support distributed energy resources. But I think Philip can talk more broadly about kind of the longer term vision and coordination.
Yeah. Thank you, Corey. I think that one of the things to keep in mind, first of all, we'd like to see better, we'll keep moving toward more and more consistency where it makes sense to do so. One of the things that makes the delivery system planning quite different from an IRP is when you're talking about utility scale resources, right? The distributed resources pieces, those really, we want those to fit together real nicely, right? That's going toward an ISP kind of approach. Big picture, when you're looking at the IRP and what resource should we put on the system in 2038, it's a generic resource in a general area, like geographic area part of the country, like Washington wind or Wyoming wind or Montana wind, as opposed to a specific action that you're planning to take. So, it's trying to make sure that we're harmonizing as much as is necessary, just keeping in mind that, that makes sense. But just keeping in mind that they're like delivery planning. When Corey showed the map, he's looking at a very specific project in a very specific geographic location. Whereas at the utility scale resources, you're not really getting that refined. So I hope that helps.
And Lauren, I think there were some previous slides from November that connected the dots between IRP and delivery system planning. And I think Meredith will drop those in the chat. So just to do a refresher. Great. Thanks for that. How about you, Fred?
Yeah, hi everybody. Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition, sort of, I guess, Lauren's understudy. The question I have is first just to say, I think it's, just broadly speaking, sounds good that you're trying to incorporate equity considerations, community considerations into this IDOT tool. What I'm not clear about is what it's actually used for. Is it basically like an asset management tool? If you have to think about what substations, where to do upgrades, what kinds of upgrades, other kinds of system improvements, or is it also used in kind of general overview planning? I'm not quite clear about what role that it plays.
Yeah, IDOT is, there is asset management that's under that too. So we do have delivery system planning programs that are more asset management focused. There also are programs that may be more focused on like automating the grid, like distribution automation, or there's programs that are more focused on improving reliability. So it's used to kind of optimize the dollars between all of those investments and between all of those different types of investments that need to occur to maintain the grid. And then now with the equity component, it's directing those investments to occur in named communities at a minimum threshold, and or maybe even prioritizing some projects based upon equity that benefit named communities. So I hope I answered it directly, but it's really the infrastructure is what that tool is used is to optimize how we make a number of investments across, any number of hundreds of projects that get identified that have different types of benefits.
Right. Okay. I think I get that. I guess my description would be, you can tell me if I didn't get this quite right, is that it's like a decision support tool, broadly speaking, that's used a lot in, kind of delivery, like you said, focusing on distribution system. But it can be, it can provide some useful value or outputs or whatever into the planning process, which is where we are.
I think that was like more on the delivery system as opposed to the like the IRP, the resource side. But there is a connection that like Philip talked about, and then between delivery system planning and the IRP. And I don't want to kick the can to Ryan. He has a little bit of a slide that talks about delivery system planning and the connection to the IRP and how that process is evolving because of distributed energy resources. So I might, you're on, I think you're on the right track.
The general idea. Yeah. I'm just thinking a little out loud here, but I think it might be helpful to think about, at least for me, to think about it as, think of a use case, like, for example, expanding, expansion of EV charging on the system, what impact that has on the distribution system, what the community effects or benefits might be. We don't want to underserve, under facilitate, named priority, whatever name you want on communities, in building out that infrastructure and doing distribution system level upgrades to handle that, including automation and all the other pieces. I think EVs are actually a really interesting case to look at because they touch so many aspects of the system. And then if you roll it up to the system-wide level, now you're looking at impacts on demand, and you're looking at potential for, maybe some load management that would have eventually have some implications on transmission use. I mean, it kind of spreads out. So I'm just thinking through, I thought, there must be a good reason why you brought this IDOT tool into the picture. I'm just trying to I think I have a better understanding now what it's really designed to do.
Yeah. Thanks, Fred and Corey. I see David is off of mute. Did you want to weigh in before I turn to Megan?
Yeah, I see some other questions are lined up here, but just to elaborate a little bit. And first of all, I just want to give compliments to Corey. He introduced himself when he started, but he's new to the planning team as of mid-year last year. He's been a longtime employee with PSE delivering customer-facing energy efficiency incentive programs. And we've brought him on board with our planning team to figure out the equity components of our delivery system planning. And to make sure that we're delivering on all of our commitments around the integration of our resource planning and our delivery system planning. So he's in the hot seat today, but he's learned all this within the last 7 or 8 months and is doing an excellent job. For some of us that have been a little bit longer on the journey, I think I can add a little bit of clarification. So we do. You think about the world of a system planner historically, what are we concerned about? First of all is safety. We need to maintain and ensure public safety and maintain a code compliant, safe energy delivery system. Secondly, we need to serve load. When customers request service, whether that's electric or currently gas, and we are still receiving gas service requests, we have an obligation to serve and provide them with capacity to meet the loads that they are requesting us to serve to them. Once we have delivered safe energy at the amount that customers have requested, then we start to think about reliability and system reliability and delivering that energy to our customers. And then the other layer is how do we do that efficiently and with reduced carbon? So the clean energy transformation. So there's kind of 4 elements there that we're working to evaluate and think about. We want to optimize our investments across all of those opportunities, and that's really what the IDOT program is helping us to do. Because we have through the flow chart that Corey presented earlier. We have all these triggers, all these considerations that identify, here's a project opportunity, here's another project opportunity. When you look at portfolio management, we delivered over 800 projects last year, implemented, constructed, that provided capacity and reliability and opportunity for clean energy integration onto our system. So as we have all of these opportunities, the IDOT is really that cost benefit analysis, making sure we're able to optimize that bundle. A little bit of additional background there. In working with our equity advisory group over the last couple of years, we came to this decision that initially we thought we could just bake the weighting factors and some of the details under the hood that you have an interest in looking into. That we'll share that information with you. There was initially an approach of, well, if we just make the formulas correct in IDOT, you just plug all the numbers in and it'll tell us the right answers. But we recognize that that's really not the status of the way or the current approach that is being used from an equity analysis perspective across the industry. We really wanted to make sure we looked at equity separately. So that's where I think you've seen Corey show the slide of, it's not just what's in IDOT and the formulas. We need to step back and think about, are we really producing a portfolio and selecting projects that are providing those direct benefits, those customer benefits to our customers that are in our named communities? And so that's the approach that we've taken by separating those out and setting that, that baseline threshold. And as you saw the 38%, yeah, we set a 30% in alignment with the CEIP. But actually, the way the IDOT formulas and everything worked, we exceeded that in our portfolio planning, which is what Corey has shared with you today. But we certainly have opportunities to prioritize and implement projects in a way that bring added benefit, additional benefit to the named communities in our service area. So we're working our way. And it's a journey in progress. So that's why we're looking for your input today. So hopefully that gives a little background context. I know we're all at a different stage on this journey of thinking about how we bring equity into our planning process, but hopefully that brings a little clarity.
Thanks, David. Let's go to Megan and then we'll do Jim. Go ahead, Megan.
Thanks. So my comment goes back to the slides that we're looking at, programmatic spending and major project spending. And my recommendation here would be to really evaluate non-pipeline alternatives, as well as, for instance, if a pipeline needs a fix, maybe making a fix to it instead of replacing the entire pipeline, especially as you're looking at long-term energy demands. And if you're expecting that demand to go down, especially looking at greenhouse gas emissions requirements under law and a zero customer growth to scenario, if you're looking at long-term load decline, making those costly investments in a gas infrastructure that will outlive the actual demand on the gas system will just end up being extraneous costs. And so I urge PSE to take future load and future energy demand into account when making those programmatic and major projects investments right now, just to promote to stop any to prevent any extraneous costs that could lead to stranded assets down the line and not be in line with future energy demands.
Thanks for that, Megan. I know that our meeting summaries are trying to do a better job of honing in on recommendations. So I feel like this is one of those recommendations that we can call out. Any reactions from PSE on that that suggestion?
I'll just jump in on that as well and speak from the gas side. We are very mindful of that, and we are being very thoughtful of where we are making our investments in our natural gas delivery system. And as we've talked about previously, number of connected customers has continued to grow. Load forecast has projected declines, but until we get to some point that we are back to the flow chart and Joel Nightingale's question earlier around a planning trigger for reducing load. As long as we have the gas delivery system, one thing that drives a lot of our decision making and our funding requirements around that are requirements for pipeline safety. And out of the federal regulatory environment with PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, there's what was called the mega rule that has recently come out. And it was the mega rule because it addressed a lot of pipeline safety concerns, which is placing additional requirements on us for pipeline safety investment and management. And then there's also the Pipes Act that has been passed, federal legislation, which requires greater focus on reducing methane leaks and other improvements in the pipeline system. So while we are mindful that there may be a shorter asset life than what it has traditionally been in the past as we're moving toward decarbonization, at the same time, we are simultaneously facing additional regulations for additional investment in pipeline safety and monitoring. So that is a significant factor in our decisions in what we are investing in pipeline integrity management.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Does that help, Megan? Great. Let's turn to Jim, and I just am aware that we're eating into Ryan's time. I think we're still fine, but just go ahead, Jim.
I will be brief. I just had two quick recommendations in response to the feedback prompt. But first, I want to express agreement with Megan's recommendation. I think considering stranded asset risk in the benefit cost analysis, through some factor in that list of inputs to the benefit cost analysis on the left side of slide 19, seems like something that Puget should be doing. And recognizing the safety considerations, I think that that probably just speaks to the level of investment that would be required under many of the infrastructure options, and recognizing that situation on the ground will vary. I think part of what Megan was getting at is that anytime there's an opportunity to incent electrification in a way that would avoid the need for such an upgrade and allow you to decommission the relevant segment of pipe or whatever the case may be, that's certainly worth looking at a level of detail that's sort of commensurate with the urgency of the resource need. And I'll be happy to share some materials related to Colorado looking at those issues in the follow-up. And then so the two quick pieces of feedback I had were first, it seems like looking at equity and all these considerations at both project and programmatic level would be valuable. And I think to what Fred was commenting on earlier, some of the, if you were able to package up sort of an analysis of what the, EV charging sort of strategy or resource portfolio looks like as it stacks up against these cost and equity metrics. Same for beneficial electrification, DSM, access to DERs. I think that could be very illuminating and helpful for Puget and for stakeholders. And then my second recommendation is, I definitely, the point is well taken on slide 20 and in response to David's comments that you don't want to get out over your skis here and perhaps just tweaking the weights in your optimization formulas aren't sufficient to kind of capture the interest in equity. But it does seem like, moving forward as you're able, moving beyond just sort of equity being like a yes, no, check on projects and moving towards something that you're trying to actively maximize through your optimization process or whatever else would be, desirable and consistent with equity obligations imposed by regulation and statute. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for those recommendations. Next, we have Dan.
Let me make sure I get my hand lowered. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm a little concerned about some of the language that's been used, and I want to reinforce something that David said. We're not talking, I don't think Puget Sound Energy in any way is talking about upgrading facilities. They're talking about investing in maintaining existing facilities that will be used and useful, and the investments being required by regulation to ensure that those facilities remain safe as they are being used throughout their lifetime. And so that's just a really important consideration. Not talking about pipeline upgrades in this space. We're talking about the investments being required by additional regulation, safety investments being made to ensure that those systems remain safe. So I just wanted to add that 2 cents, and I'm not arguing on any of the points that others have been making. It's just important that we use the language correctly and understand what we're talking about here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those additions and clarifications, Dan. It's helpful. Anything else in response to PSE's request for feedback about other recommendations as they evolve their delivery system planning? Great.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for the feedback, and yeah, thank you for letting me present today.
Yeah, Corey, thank you so much. There's a lot of great information there, and some of you mentioned some resources. I think Jimmy mentioned something out of Colorado. Feel free to put it in the chat or message Meredith, and we can include it in the final meeting materials today. Very good. Well, everyone, we're having a break in after Ryan, so take a quick mental break, 30 seconds here, and as we shift gears. So if you wanted to go to the next slide, Will. So before I turn it to Ryan, I just want to note that here we'll be talking about the hosting capacity map, and next slide. At this point, it's really at the informing level. So PSE is just sharing information about this map. It doesn't seem like this is the moment where there's going to make big shifts or upgrades. It's just kind of keeping you all in the loop. So with that, you can go to the next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Lambert, and I'm the manager of electric system planning here at PSE. Today, my plan is really to discuss 3 things with you all. First of all, how integrated resource planning and delivery system planning processes are becoming more integrated, with the big reason being DER. So I thought Lauren's prompt earlier was perfect. Second is how PSE is thinking about the optimal siting of DERs. And third is how the hosting capacity map that we use can support the optimal siting. So first of all, right here, the key thing here to know is the integrated resource planning and delivery system planning processes were really stood up for 2 different reasons, but they're now becoming integrated. The IRP is responsible for optimal resource selection to satisfy energy needs, and the delivery system planning is really responsible for delivering the energy where we need it. These 2 processes were really set up separate just because of the nature of one-way power flow. So as Corey was talking about earlier, we had the generation system and delivery system planning system kind of flows one way. There's a nice, easy handoff. But the reality is the future's changing. And that really comes to fruition with DERs because they can have the ability to serve both IRP and delivery system planning needs. So if you go to the next slide. And the highlight here is that the two processes are now evolving to really support the needed grid transformation in changing environments. If you look here on the left, the inputs to the delivery system analysis are really becoming more challenging due to forecasts from DERs and EVs, decarbonization and rate of change. All that is feeding the delivery system analysis here, which then in turn feeds the IRP process. So the DSP actually informs the IRP by providing the value of avoided transmission and distribution costs, as well as where we can find non-wire alternatives. The IRP in turn also has some complex things feeding it as well, but it provides the delivery system plan with value of capacity, energy from renewables, and reduced line loss. So these things are becoming more and more integrated, and they feed each other to come up with a more robust planning process. If we go to the next slide. And this is where it all comes together. So one of the first steps in integrating is really trying to figure out how we optimize DER siting. DERs have the benefit of serving both an IRP resource need and providing delivery system benefits. We think that the ideal location for DER siting on the system is a place that really has three key attributes. First of all, that we have hosting capacity available. And what I mean by that is like how many or what is the total load of solar that we can put on the distribution system or whatever renewable it is that we can reliably accommodate without significant grid upgrades. So we're trying to think of that upfront cost. The second one is on system capacity needs. And here we're trying to figure out where DERs can really offset distribution substation loading that goes with the coincident load peak for that area, and therefore defer the need for traditional wire solutions. And the third component, which kind of goes similar to what Corey was talking about a little bit earlier with equity, is does the DER itself serve a named community that would really benefit from having the clean energy there, and therefore would actually alleviate capacity constraints for economic development. So that's the way we're thinking about it. And now the third part of the presentation is to talk about how we are going to show it. So go ahead, Joel.
Thanks. Yeah, well, a question just struck me on the description of hosting capacity. I think the current hosting capacity map is based on solar photovoltaics. I think that's what PV means here, but I understand there's maybe a direction you're heading to incorporate other DERs. Is that the case, or am I understanding?
Yeah, that is true. Right now we have a simplified view because we have to pick some sort of snapshot in time, and so we looked at like minimum loading during during a summer day. And so you're right, it shows PV connection, and it gives us insight as far as what batteries could be connected in. But that would require further analysis because it turns on the nice thing about batteries is they're very flexible, but the timing in which they discharge and recharge requires a little bit further study. We are releasing a second update to the hosting capacity map later this year. We'll try to address some of the additional use cases, but still working through that scope. But great observation, Joel, and I think you mentioned it before too, so I appreciate you bringing it up. So if we go to the next slide. So this is where it comes together. So how do we tell people where we want DERs? The first thing we think about is really the hosting capacity map because of its capabilities. And the first layer we have here is where we have hosting capacity available, with most capacity shown in blue and green. This shows where we can put solar on the distribution system without significant grid upgrades and therefore upfront costs. As I mentioned just in my earlier comment, this reflects the minimum daytime loading, so it's more intended for PVs, but it's an okay indicator for batteries in terms of what they could put on the system during the day, but they are more flexible. And then I'm gonna walk you through each individual layer and you'll see how they all coincide. So if we go to the next slide, the second layer here that I'm showing is for substation loading, where we can show our biggest loading constraints. For solar and battery DER solutions, the benefits usually align best with summer loading. So that's what we're showing here at the substation level. And so where we would want DERs is areas placed in the red because they can offset distribution substation loading during coincident load peak for that area. and really defer the need for traditional wire solutions. And then if you go to the third slide, or the next one, this is the third layer. And this is where we can start to show how highly impacted communities on a similar map. And we believe that by focusing on these communities, we can increase the capacity in those areas for economic development. And then we'd also provide clean energy benefits to those areas as well. And so all three layers can be combined in the final slide. So if you flip to the next one, yeah. So right here, this is where we believe the ideal location is for DERs. It's really the intersection of the three layers. It's an area where we have hosting capacity available, high capacity loading, and it serves a named community. Well, what we're showing here in kind of that green circle, it's what is meant to be depictional as an example. We have spots like this all across the system. And this is just the daylight where we think we have the most benefit, but there's also outside constraints for these areas that developers have to consider. And that includes land availability, jurisdictional permitting, and even jurisdictional moratoriums in some cases for batteries. And so today's presentation was meant to be informative. It was meant to show how we're thinking about the connection between the IRP and the DSP, how we're looking at optimal siting of DERs, because it matters more than it ever has as we look at the grid of the future. But I would be open, we are open to feedback as far as if we're on the right track, if we're looking at optimal locations, if the thinking makes sense in terms of optimal locations. And if there's some things that we haven't considered, we'd be open to that feedback as well.
Thanks, Ryan. So we have about 20 minutes for that conversation. So, whether you all think PSE is on the right track with this, whether the right considerations are at play. Anyone want to weigh in who's a fan of spatial data like this? Thoughts? Yeah, go ahead. We'll do Joel and then John.
I'm a fan of spatial data, and I like these maps. I didn't actually have a suggestion. It was more of a question. But I'm curious how this data gets used. A lot of, I think the distributed solar out there is kind of is net metered solar, is my understanding, and it's sort of a first come first serve basis that PSE may have limited control over where that ends up being installed. So is there something I'm missing about that? Is PSE trying to use this actively, or is it more of a passive, just sort of a signal to developers for where there might be streamlined interconnection kind of process, or how does that work?
Yeah, really great question. It works a few ways. We have a few different schedules depending on the size of what's being connected. Joe, I think what you might be referring to is more like on the net metering residential, like small scale commercial side, in which case, yeah, it gives them a sense of where they can connect. But I think where we get the most benefit from this tool is we will be releasing what calls our distributed solar and storage RFP this year, where we're soliciting DERs on our systems to procure them. And by telling them where we want them, it allows for a better benefit to cost ratio and a more success ratio as far as the acceptance of those DERs under our system. So I would say it's a tool that we use within our RFP. We use it as a tool in our previous RFP that we did last year. So if you look up PSE DSS RFP, you could see like there was a link to this map within it, and we're intending to do so in future releases as well. Did that answer your question, Joel?
Yeah, it did. Thanks.
Perfect. Great.
Dave, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quickly. Ryan didn't say it explicitly, so I will. In our last general rate case, one of our settlement agreement conditions was that we will look to find ways for distributed energy resources to enhance the carrying capacity of the distribution system, relieving the burden on our customers for the cost of energy delivery system. And this is the way we are doing it. This is the way we are fulfilling that commitment we've made through our settlement agreement for the last GRC. Is we are looking to steer developers and providers of distributed energy resources to apply these resources in areas where it brings benefit to our delivery system and brings benefit to the consumer who is, bearing cost of the energy system in investments.
Great. Thanks for that. Let's do John and then Froy. John, please.
Thanks. And I'd also like to jump on the bandwagon and say that I also love this spatial data. This is like it's really useful. I actually had a very similar question to Joel, and so I will just kind of spin off the question a little bit and probe a little bit deeper. So it sounds like the connection between this spatial data and how kind of, I guess, where the rubber hits the road in terms of how resources might get acquired is that it's kind of helping guide the potential that you are seeking out as like the high value potential in the RFP. One of my questions, I guess, is I was just wondering if you folks have any ideas in terms of, and perhaps it's in the link that just got posted, but if you folks have any ideas in terms of these layers, how restrictive of that is the potential if, say, 2 out of the 3 criteria were satisfied? Would that also be something that was pretty high benefit, maybe if not the highest benefit? And so kind of the sub question is, have you classed these, or is this, does it seem to give a large enough potential that you folks think that it's a good filtering process?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad to have another fan of the geospatial layers. That's always good to have. Yeah, so if you look at the RFP link that Sophie just listed, there we do talk about how we score the RFPs as the responses to the RFP as they come in. We do look at benefit cost ratio as the primary driver, right? So how can we acquire these resources for the cheapest rate for our customers? But we are trying to daylight here, like, all else being equal, it would be great to locate it in a highly impacted community. So we're trying to direct that in this solicitation process. And in this last RFP, we got a lot more proposals than we've seen before, I think, because we were directive as far as where we would prefer them. And this next go around, I think we'll try to be even more explicit by highlighting specific areas that we'd like to see. It's one thing to see the geospatial map and you can go find it yourself, but there are very key needs on the system that I think would be a good potential for non-wire alternatives. And this is where it all comes together. If we could be more explicit about that. Did that answer your question, John?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. Next we have Froy, please.
Yeah, hi, Ryan. Yeah, and thank you for presenting this. This is really interesting. I am currently working on optimization model that uses GIS data to try to find best locations for commercial size PV investments. And I think I'm interested in sort of thinking about what or asking you about your DER sizing assumptions. Some folks raised up the net metering question for residential, but these are slightly larger potential requests, right? What are the sizes, sort of ranges that you're thinking or that you're going to be maybe requesting?
Roy, I don't know off the top of my head. I can get back to you. If we look into the RFP link, I think they do talk about the size of it. We are looking at on the distribution system, but I'd have to get back to you on that for size.
No worries. And also just, for my own personal enrichment, and also maybe to enrich my own model, the sources for your data, the hosting capacity and the substation loading, I'm guessing is PSE own modeling. And my model does not work only with PSE region. I'm trying to build a larger model that uses some other assumptions for capacity, hosting, and loading of the distribution network. But the highly impacted communities is it's open, right? It's not. This is defined by someone else.
Yes, that is correct.
Any way or any conversations between other utilities that are trying to think about this in a more sort of holistic way, maybe thinking about what is the hosting capacity across the state, what is the summer substation loading at the bigger than PSE. I know we're talking about PSE specifically right now, but as far as you know, is there any sort of collaboration across the state to try to think about this sharing of data?
I am not aware, but others on the call may be. So if others are, feel free. I'm not aware of a state collaboration. I do know there are utilities at different stages of having hosting capacity maps, and there's different levels of which information they share.
Mhm.
We have used that as far as the development of our next release. And so we do collaborate with them as far as best practices and trying to do the best we can for our customers and and for our system. So we take that into account, but I'm not aware of a statewide initiative.
Thank you, Trent.
Thanks for that. And Emily, just for the notes, just flag that first question that Froy asked about kind of the scale and the size, and we'll add that to the feedback report. Thanks, Froy. Okay, let's do Joel.
Thanks, Sophie. Yes, I appreciate all this discussion. Part of it, I think, maybe Ryan, something that you said got me thinking more about the size of the projects we're talking about here. You mentioned the distributed solar and storage RFP, and I'm wondering. So there seems to be kind of an assumption, or what sounds like an assumption to me, that highly impacted vulnerable populations would prefer to have these resources cited in their communities. And I'm wondering what kind of ground truthing PSE has done for that assumption, and whether that's rung true in the community level engagement that PSE has done, or if they'd actually prefer for it to be somewhere else. For batteries, for solar, for any of the types of resources that y'all are considering prioritizing in these certain geographic areas.
I'll take a stab and others can jump in too. Joel, that's a keen observation and one that we're dipping our toes into as far as thinking about what's the best spot, and one that we've talked about quite a bit. The thinking here was just that if we do put DERs on the system, then we do increase capacity available for economic development in those areas. And so that was the thinking behind it. But as they do siting and as we get community feedback, as these resources come alive, then we can figure out how those processes might be tweaked. But I think that's a good discussion point as far as what is the optimal location. We think the answer was named communities because of the economic development benefit, but if somebody feels differently, we're open to hear others' feedback.
Yeah, I have I mean, if you don't mind, Sophie,
Yeah, jump in, Froy. Yeah.
Yeah, Joel, there's actually decent data, or this is a sort of field of research right now that trying to really understand the feelings about renewable energy and transition projects along multiple demographic indicators. And LBNL has some research on this. If you look for, I don't know, energy justice or energy equity and LBNL, and I can point you in some direction in that field. But yeah, it's what it's kind of sort of understood is that there is I mean, it's a little bit of a complicated picture, but I think that overall it's not as negatively seen as fossil fuel projects location. It's still, some people will say no, and it kind of depends on who you ask. But I think on general, there's some similarities and some differences to opposition to other fossil fuel projects.
Thanks. Froy, if you have a link to something direct to LBNL, if not, I just have the general link pulled up, but that might be good information there. Great. Joel, is your hand still up from before, or new response? Go ahead.
It is up from before, but I just wanted to thank Froylan for chiming in there, and Ryan for your response to that. Yeah, Froylan, if you have any, oh, and there it is, right in the chat. Thanks, Froylan. I will take a look at that. Appreciate it.
Great. Good. Froy, any other thoughts, or is your hand just up from before? Oh, there it goes, disappearing. Good, lots of good chat items here in the chat. So we have 5 minutes until our break. We could take it early if there are no other questions or comments, but certainly we have the time. So any thoughts? And I'll just focus in on the folks we haven't heard from yet. Anyone who hasn't spoken want to weigh in? Well, oh, go ahead, Ryan. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, just for closing remarks. Yeah, I just really appreciate the conversation today. If you have any additional feedback, you're more welcome to reach out. I'm glad we have some geospatial fans and just a great conversation overall. So really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great, Ryan. Well, there was just a lot of information, and we know this is over your lunch hour, so I'm going to recommend that we take a 15-minute break. I'm going to flex my facilitator muscles there and say that we all come back here at 2 o'clock. Oh, let's see, it's 10 minutes. So yes, at 1:50. So 15 minutes, come back at 1:50, and we'll wrap our conversation with Jen and Philip. So thank you so much, Ryan, and we'll see you all in 15 minutes. All right, if everyone can come back to their desks, come back on video. Great, we see Jen. If Will could share his screen again. Of course, I call this meeting back to order just as I took a bite of something, so that's on me. Let's see, Will, are you around? And let's make sure Philip is back on camera too, just because I know he might be chiming in. He's back, great. All right. I think Will will be joining us shortly, perfect. Well, for the last hour of our meeting today, roughly, there's going to be a conversation about decarbonization scenarios in the gas and the electric IRP. Jen will be doing a little bit of a recap of what you shared at the end of last year, kind of confirming those pieces. So we have 3 pretty dense slides coming into this. Before I turn it over to Jen, I just want to do our IAP2 moment. So go ahead. Next slide, please. So this information is kind of on the inform and consult side of things. Jen is going to be asking you some kind of concrete questions, but of course, throughout, if you have any other ideas or suggestions, you all can weigh in. So with that, I will turn it over to Jen, please.
Good afternoon. Yeah, so I'm Jennifer Colson. I'm the manager of operations and gas analysis at PSE, and kind of been really driving the electrification stuff internally to date. So next slide. So as Sophie mentioned, if you recall, back in December, we did have a mural board exercise with the RPAG specifically asking kind of what did you want to see out of the 25 IRP, both gas and electric? And we got a lot of input on electrification specifically. But I also wanted to note that this feedback is also encompassing feedback from the public meetings that we've had to date. So while many of the public meetings didn't specifically address electrification, we did receive quite a lot of input from the public from those meetings in the 2-minute comments at the end of the meetings, as well as in the feedback reports. And so I collaborated or grabbed all of that information, as well as the feedback reports from these RPAG meetings and the public comment after the meetings themselves as well, and kind of did a really high level summary of everything and kind of shown here on this slide. And so I'll walk through a couple of things in a minute, but at a high level, you know, some of the comments that we've received was really evaluating the impacts of alternative fuels in the portfolio and considering not using alternative fuels, specifically in the gas portfolio. Something else we heard a lot from a few people was regarding the gas system and looking at a scenario where the gas system is retired by 2050, and what would that do? We also heard from people interest in looking at gas and electric portfolio, as well as the gas and electric infrastructure impacts, kind of teeing up the comments we heard in the prior conversation with system planning, which is timely. So I do have a slide to kind of talk through what we actually intended to do for the electrification scenario, which I hope addresses a lot of people's concerns. And I think the reasoning for that was, which is valid, is really looking at the avoided stranded costs from those scenarios specifically. We heard from many that relying on allowances in the portfolio, they felt that was a risk to PSE. So really looking at bringing emissions down to the consigned allowance line in a scenario to determine what that would look like. We also looked at or heard about natural heat pump adoption into the forecast. I think Philip and Joel and others have already kind of talked about that at the beginning of the meeting. And then we also had some input regarding gas conservation on appliances. And so there's some options to maybe not have gas conservation in these scenarios and see what it does. We also talked about modeling electrification at different paces. And so we will incorporate that as well. And so Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So I appreciate these, and there's a slide similar to this about summary of what we've heard. I think it's helpful to see sort of a synopsis of what feedback came in. But I'm wondering if because I see that the feedback report isn't on the website yet, and I'm wondering if there's some expectation the RPAG can have about when we can see the feedback that others provided and PSE's responses to those. We try to stick as closely as we can to providing feedback a week before to a week after within the window that PSE's sort of outlined for feedback on a given RPAG meeting. And I'm wondering if there's an expectation that we can all have about when the responses to those will come, especially to inform discussion on this exact slide where, PSE is providing what they heard. And I think it'd be helpful for us to have that information so that we could inform the discussion even further.
Yeah, I think we can we'll put it in the feedback offline regarding the exact timeline that PSE follows to publish feedback reports and responses. That works. I guess question, are you referring to like the January meetings, or which one are we missing something for the December one?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So this is on the December one. So I think that one is there. You're right. It's more about the January ones, I guess. It's been just over a month now since the January 12th meeting.
Oh yeah, I think that went out. Yes, this will be posted today. Yeah, January 12th is posted today actually, so you'll get it. And then I think the following week will be the January 17th. But we'll make that timeline more clear for you.
Okay, yeah, appreciate that. And then on the slide, actually, while I'm talking, I had a question about sort of how PSE is interpreting this natural heat pump adoption forecast. I think there's different ways maybe to think about what natural means. And so I'm curious to know in sort of the approach that you're planning for this electrification scenario, or even for the base scenario, what level of natural adoption and what's built into that assumption?
Yeah, so this specific item was just related more to the base forecast, and I think more to what Philip was mentioning at the beginning of the conversation. The intention, I guess the way I interpreted it, which would be good to clarify, is that this is customers are, converting to electric end uses today with no incentives for whatever reasons they may have, whether it's, they live in Seattle and they have requirements that are pushing them in that direction, or maybe customers are choosing to do so for their own personal beliefs and what they think is really important. So that's kind of where I thought a natural heat pump adoption was. Did you have a different interpretation?
That's helpful to understand how you're seeing. I don't know that I have like a right answer or anything, but that certainly I think is a reasonable place to start. And I'd be interested if others on the call have other thoughts too about what the right approach to that in the baseline portfolio is. One thing that comes to mind is like certain Inflation Reduction Act or IIJA incentives that may, I guess maybe a question is, have those hit yet? Or is that something that we could look at to historical heat pump adoption to get an understanding for, or is that something that's coming that might require a little bit more forecasting?
I think that's coming. And so that is incorporated in the work that Cadmus is doing. So they're considering the incentives from IRA and in their analysis. And so that'll be there. It's kind of, what they showed in load forecasting was before DSR and demand side impact. So you'll see that when they come back with their update from the CPA and after it comes out of the IRP of what's selected. But there's a bucket that will take off for that, if that helps clarify.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, any other questions? Because I think there'll be a lot more. Okay, go ahead, Summer.
Hi, yeah, sorry. I apologize in advance because I did miss the December meeting, so this is maybe repetitive for others, but could you just talk a little bit more about the feedback on incorporating the assumption that the gas system will be retired by 2050? And then I haven't seen the PSE feedback, so just kind of curious what retired actually means, like fully gone, or are we talking about it's depreciated? And maybe, just PSE's feedback on that bullet. If you could just.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a few people suggested this one in the public. I believe I saw it in public comments and in the RPAG on the mirror board. And good clarification, I was assuming it meant that we're depreciating all the assets by 2050 and kind of closing up shop on the gas system itself. I don't know that we'd necessarily remove everything, but you would depreciate those assets and, safely close things off. Great for you.
Okay, sorry. So PSE would just cease to provide gas service by 2050. That's
yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I guess maybe it would help to clarify which of these would apply to the base scenario versus because now we're shifting into the kind of electrification scenario discussion. So I'm maybe unclear which one of these applies to which. I think I heard you say the natural heat pump adoption would go into the base forecast. Is that correct?
Yeah, so everything on this, that's a good clarification. So everything on this list, I'm really talking about the electrification scenarios, so not the base. The incorporate natural heat pump adoption was an action that the load forecasting team was taking to dive into. And it sounds like they had more conversation that Philip addressed at the beginning of the meeting regarding where they're seeing that. And at the system level, we're not seeing an impact on the negative side at this point in time to incorporate. But everything else is incorporated into the electrification scenarios that we've pulled together today.
Okay, so just to make sure I'm clear, the incorporating that natural heat pump adoption into forecast is something that the team is looking to do into the base forecast, but everything else on this list applies more exclusively to the electrification scenarios. Is that right?
Yeah. Philip, did you want to add something?
You got it.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thank you for that.
Like, did I butcher it? I don't know.
It did great.
It was great, Jen. Summer, is your hand up again, or was it up from before? There we go. Oh, perfect.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions?
Great. Thanks, Jen.
Cool.
Yeah, you can move on then.
Yeah, next slide. Okay, so this I hope addresses some of the topics discussed earlier, as well as some feedback we've received in those different forms that I mentioned. So this is just a caveat. We're really looking at this for the electrification scenarios, so not necessarily all the other scenarios that the gas and electric portfolio may run. But when we look at electrification, it's really important to consider the impacts to the system and at the transmission and distribution level, as well as the electrification portfolio. So on the far left, we're looking at inputs, and this is really the loads. So for electrification, we'll have some scenarios that we'll discuss in a moment, and that'll provide gas system and electric system loads based on end use adoption. And the end use adoption will vary depending on this specific scenario. That information will flow into the gas portfolio model and the electric portfolio model. The loads that we currently get for this type of analysis are really at the system level. And as we just discussed with electric system planning, they're much more detailed. So to create an all-encompassing portfolio, as we might call it, where we're looking at the gas and electric supply side portfolio, as well as the electric and gas transmission and distribution system planning analysis. This is a bit higher level of an analysis than what the system planning team would do for an actual planning exercise. But it does give us a good insight regarding how much infrastructure investment or reduction we would be looking at for these different load curves, loads for each type of system. So we're proposing that we'll pull those into the gas portfolio and the electric model. We'll also have electric system planning and gas system planning do an analysis as well to determine how much infrastructure is increasing or decreasing for each of the electrification scenarios. And the outputs of all of those models will, again, give us a volume of infrastructure per area. It'll allow us to understand how much of an alternative fuel is selected if an alternative fuel is used in that scenario, and the applicable emissions for that scenario, because we think it's really important to consider the reduction of emissions on the gas side and then the potential increase of emissions on the electric side all together to make sure in total we're reducing emissions together. And another area we'd really like to bring forward in the electrification analysis is looking at the financial impacts to customers. So taking like an average residential customer and estimating their annual energy costs, is really helpful in understanding the impacts of each of these scenarios from a customer's perspective. And we can mess with equipment costs and whatnot as well on that. So any questions on this approach for the electrification scenarios?
Questions for Jen? I'm not seeing any in the chat, but any hand raises? Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks.
Hey.
Thanks for that. I just want to clarify that I need to put my camera on. Actually, that's not what I needed to clarify. So I'm curious in the electric system planning, the gas portfolio model, electric portfolio model. I assume that there is a design day translation that occurs between those two. I know electric portfolio models consider redundancy and -1, whereas gas portfolio model considers design day. How does that translation occur, and how does it ripple through the rest of the analysis?
Yeah, I see the manager of the gas. Nisi, did you want to chime in on that specifically? Oh, I thought.
All right, let me take that off.
Oh, there we go.
So that's a great point, Dan. Right now, I think we're just, as we're doing it, we are assuming that we're not trying to whatever the reliability is that's allowed on the electric as they electrify over there, they would get that level of reliability versus what we do here. So we're not actually doing that translation at this time, but would be open to discussing that further and understanding how we could do that better.
I guess what I would add is that, what we're basically doing is taking you're reducing the gas load, and then you're going over to the electric side and you're saying, well, here's what the load looks like here's the load curve, right? For 87, 60 hours. This is what the load looks like. And then that has, on the electric side, it has, say, for example, in the electric portfolio model, you have the planning reserve margin that goes with that normal peak on the electric side. So we're really just, we're taking it from the gas side and moving it over to just the way that it would look on the electric side. So it's not that we're doing the same design day peak standard that we would take from the gas over to the electric, kind of take the load over to the electric, and then you apply the electric planning framework to that. I don't know if that was helpful, Dan.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing you say is what I heard you say, Philip, is you're taking the load. So the load on a design day is what the electric system has to accommodate within its reliability standards. That's what I'm.
So that whatever the normal peak plus the planning reserve margin will cover that. I mean, that's kind of the intent here. I'm sure we'll get better at it in the future, but that's really where it's going.
Does that help, Dan? Good. Great.
It sure does. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dan. All right, let's turn to Lauren.
It's not totally clear to me if electrification is being modeled like any other resource for meeting a gas customer load. I mean, I guess if you could speak to like, how is this different than what's done for conservation? That would be helpful. I mean, I think long term, like the goal is that this is sort of done like endogenously within the model itself, and sort of electrification is like a resource that can both meet PSE's customers' energy needs, right? And also reduce its carbon obligation. And so I'm just kind of curious, like, are we close to that? Do we have more work to do to get to that point? But how do you view this approach within sort of that goal?
Yeah, so this approach is really focused on the electrification scenarios where electrification is forced in, I would say, right? It's not doing the traditional cost-effective test on electrification. We had looked at it a little bit in the last IRP, just on the hybrid heat pump side, and didn't see it really get selected in the portfolio. And electrification measures were more expensive than that hybrid heat pump one. So we're anticipating that it may have a similar result, but we are trying actually to ask that question in the portfolio. So that's kind of outside of this scenario conversation specifically, but more on the base case. If we looked at electrification as a measure, like if it was energy efficiency, would it be selected? That's a question that we're trying to see if we can get incorporated. But for this approach and this analysis that I'm referring to right now, it's really forcing in electrification based on the different scenarios we determine that we want to have. It'll have customer, market assumptions and adoption based on research that Cadmus had done, right, and potential. It has some sense, but there is one scenario where we would be forcing faster than customers would be willing to transition. So, and we'll get to that in a second, but if that helps, Lauren.
I think so. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, more to come if we get that sorted. And I think we have a scenario meeting March 25th, I think. So more to come.
Great. Thanks for that response and for the question. I see Jim's hand.
Yeah, I know the focus here is on the forcing in electrification scenario, so I don't want to delay us too much, but did want to just underscore Lauren's point that electrification needs to be treated as a selectable resource and it needs to be modeled realistically. And I think many of the comments, particularly from the 2023 IRP that I know many parties submitted, I think addressed ways in which the modeling of the costs related to electrification treated as a resource could be done more realistically. And I guess the slide we started with on some of the feedback, I think some of that feedback ought to apply to the base scenario, not just to the one where electrification is forced in. I'm thinking of things like the risk associated with a DCA strategy that over relies on emission allowances, or a factor that accounts for stranded asset risk associated with gas investment. So won't belabor that now, but do want to just emphasize that it's I think a very critical thing that we look forward to having a discussion on. And if you can give any I guess clarification on when in this process we have to expect that conversation to occur, that would be very helpful.
Any thoughts, Jen, or others?
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification and underscoring where your comments should align. That's really helpful. And yeah, we'll have a conversation on the general reference cases and scenarios outside of electrification force in specific in March. So we can probably get the correct date in the chat when someone looks it up. But yeah, that's when I'd look for that conversation.
Great, thanks, Jen. Anyone else? All right, Jennifer, carry on and I'll get that date.
Okay, cool. So next, so this is the modeling approach. And then if we go to the next slide. Oh, it's not animated. Okay. I was hoping to be animated to help draw your attention, but we'll work with it. So when we laid out all the feedback, there was a lot, and it's really nice to have that much engagement. And collectively, when I looked at it all on the page, it was really kind of streaming down to 3 different levels of electrification, like a high, a mid, and a low. And so I think my intention for this conversation is just to walk through what we were thinking when we laid this out. And then I really would like just to dive into it with everyone and have conversation regarding each scenario to just make sure we're aligning on our thought process or understand where we're disagreeing. So I'll do that first, and then I think we'll open it up, and Philip may chime in as well as we get into this. I think it's easiest to start with the high. There's a lot of words on this page. So let's just ignore the top two and focus on the bottom row here that talks about high. So when we think of high electrification, based on the feedback and input we received, really looking at forcing the conversion of end uses on the gas system down to the consigned allowance line, really limiting that reliance on the purchase of allowances to that free allowance line. This would require full electrification, which I just really want to caveat because I feel like sometimes it gets lost in translation. Just electrifying your heating furnace is not electrification in its entirety, right? If the intention is to retire the gas system by 2050, which is that second box on the screen, then you really have to convert the whole home. Also, I just wanted to note that in the 23 IRP, we did force in electrification. It was scenario 2. And it was based on burnout and assumed 100% of the incremental costs would be covered for that scenario. And I can post in the chat where it's at in the book, but there is still quite a bit that is above the consigned allowance line, even in that scenario, even when you're forcing customers to transition. And the reason that's important is because to get a customer to electrify before your equipment needs to be replaced may require some additional cost outside of the incremental cost of that transition. So it makes it more costly is just why I want to bring it up. And then the next column is really looking at no gas conservation on appliances, and then no alternative fuels. And then we are incorporating across the board in the base cases, everything, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Climate Commitment Act, funding that would go to electrification. But the question is, would it be helpful to have, or it would be required that we identify like the other funding that would be needed to accomplish this scenario, right? Because like I mentioned, you would have to incentivize these customers quite significantly to hit that emission target.
Jennifer, I saw Summer's hand come up. There it is. Go ahead, Summer.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt, sorry. But I guess a lot of the examples here, when we talk about retiring the gas system and the full electrification conversion, seem centered around like residential load. And I guess I'm just curious how this contemplates industrial load, particularly those industrial customers that don't have alternatives at all. I mean, is this just assuming that those businesses go away, or how is that captured or not captured, I guess, in this section?
Yeah, I'd have to follow up on the specifics, but Cadmus does have an assumption regarding some industrial loads and their ability to convert. I think there may be a few, but you're right. I think with this scenario, something this drastic, you would anticipate that those customers are likely to move away in this view of the world if that were to happen. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. But.
Anyone else from PSE want to chime in on that one? And Emily, it sounds like Jen, is there a follow-up there, or you feel like that's kind of the extent of the answer?
I think it depends on Summer. Do you want more details? We can definitely try and provide their approach on that. Or if that's good enough for you for now.
No, I mean, is it essentially what we saw? I mean, is it the information from Cadmus that's also part of the decarbonization study? Is it the same?
Yeah, it's based on the same adoption curves.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, great. Good to know. So then I see a question in the chat from Lauren. So just to read it out loud, Lauren wants to clarify, PSE does IRP planning for core customers only, right? Is that true, Jennifer?
I guess core customer, I guess, where you look at our total sales load.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is if customers procure their own gas, that's not part of PSE's
Correct.
planning, right? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. I was like, cool. We're all special. Yeah.
Yeah. And Philip, I see you're off of mute. Did you want to reply to this or to earlier to Summer's question? Go ahead.
Really a little bit of both, and that is retire. In the bottom, let's focus on that bottom row. Retire the gas system by 2050. I don't know what again, my question is, what do y'all think makes sense? Do you, we're hearing feedback from other people saying you need to look at retiring the gas system by 2050. We are obligated to meet the CCA requirements for smaller sized transport customers, right? So rather than core, I kind of say, well, there's gas sales. Some of them are interruptible and some of them are firm. But big picture, we're responsible for supply planning for all of them, for the sales customers. We are responsible for the delivery system for all of them, right? And so y'all tell us, what would you like to see when we say retire system by 2050? Does that mean for the whole system, as Jen suggested? That's kind of what we thought it meant, was that there would be no more gas utility come 2050. If you want to change that, what we're open to hearing from you. What do you think we should do with that in this scenario?
Yeah. I'm not sure whether Jim and Lauren were responding to that, but let's finish your thread, Philip. Dan, were you responding to Philip's question just now, or?
Yes.
Great. Lauren or Jim, were you responding to Philip's question? Okay. So Dan, let's turn.
I was,
but
yeah.
Okay, great. So let's do Dan and then Lauren.
Just really quickly, Philip, in this assumption of retiring the entire gas utility, are you only thinking, and maybe this goes a little bit after Summer's question, only thinking about impacts to PSE core customers? Or you think because, if the gas utility doesn't exist anymore from 2050 or beyond, how are electric generators being accommodated? How are industrial consumers? What are the impacts on them? I assume that's not in your space, so you're probably not making that kind of analysis, but that's a thing. Am I right?
Well, no, yeah, I think, Dan, it is important to ask that question, because one of the things that we will certainly do, I mean, if we're saying we're going to retire the entire gas system by 2050, that will have an impact on depreciation rates and on customer bills, all customer bills, right? If that's what is desired, that's what we can study. If that's not, then we don't have to, we can study something different, like just saying, hey, let's assume all transport customers are just on their own, but we're maintaining the pipes to their facilities or something, right? I guess I don't know. So this is not like the scenario that we said, I know, let's make sure we retire the gas system by 2050. This is kind of responding to feedback and what do folks want to see? I think there's plenty of good reasons to talk about both of them. So we just kind of want to hear from y'all.
Thanks, Philip. Let's go to Lauren, who I think was responding as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think my feedback on this is that there's enough uncertainty and sort of ambiguity around what retirement of the gas system means that I don't know that that's a useful thing to try to model, like retiring the entire gas system by 2050. It just sounds like that is going to be I think we can all just guess that that's like an infeasible scenario here, based on the uncertainty and ambiguity around what some of that means. So I guess my feedback would be for the company to focus on, like, what would it look like to transition, all of our residential and commercial gas heating customers to electricity by 2050 and continue to maintain the delivery system for that subset of customers that, Philip, I think you were kind of getting at, that like purchase their own gas. I feel like that might be a more useful way of thinking about this. But yeah, I'd be interested in other folks' thoughts as well.
And just a real quick one before we jump over to other people, just Lauren, and everybody else for that matter. We can focus on space and water heat and leave the other end uses alone for everybody, for all customer classes. Or we can talk about the, you know, the entire block of residential customers, they're completely electrified, or, you know, smaller commercial customers, we can assume they're completely electrified, or some end uses. Just want to make sure that we're, you know, just let's think all this through and get that all sorted out. So.
Yeah. I hate to keep you waiting, Jim, but I think Summer and Joel also were responding to this prompt. So I'll just do Summer and then Joel. Go ahead, Summer.
Yeah, I can be brief, and I'll just say, you know, I appreciate this. I agree with Lauren that I'm not sure how valuable this is, and probably looking at it in a more granular level, it makes sense. I'll certainly take back what we would like to see here, but just, yeah, wanted to provide that feedback.
Thanks, Summer. And Joel.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief too, but I think the one thing that comes to mind is the conversations we had about alternative fuels and what value they have in the general direction of possible decarbonization. I know that a lot of the feedback that I heard in some of the public webinars and maybe in this group as well was like in hard to electrify industries, that it might make sense to think about some of those alternative fuels, whether it's green hydrogen or renewable natural gas. But like for mass consumption of like residential loads, it might not make as much sense given fuel constraints and cost impacts. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. I don't know if I have like specific recommendation, but I would think about kind of that angle too when it comes to what it makes sense maybe to think about modeling here as a scenario.
Thanks for that, Joel. Any reactions before I turn to Jim? Okay. All right. Good thread. That was a productive tangent there. Jim, what were you going to say?
First, I am inclined to agree with Lauren's suggestion, although we'll give it some more thought and see if we have anything to add in written feedback. As to Joel's comment on alternative fuels, I think part of the reason that we don't see much of a role for alternative fuels, you know, in the bulk of fuel delivery in the sort of long-term decarbonization scenarios, is that we just don't see them penciling out cost-wise or in terms of availability. And so I guess I don't know how much effort I would recommend putting into like constraining selection of alternative fuels versus just modeling them realistically. But probably for purposes of these scenarios, what you have proposed on the slide seems fine to me. The one comment I was going to make was, you know, related to the incremental funding sources that Jennifer was describing. I guess it seems a little bit, I think it's tricky in a scenario where you're assuming, I guess, you know, sort of the way you're forcing in electrification into the model is through some sort of mandate or requirement to move toward electrification faster than you would be able to incentivize it naturally. And in that circumstance, I think there's probably, like, you don't want to also include all of the incentive funds that would be required to incent people to do it voluntarily, right? Because you're sort of duplicating the effect of the mandate there, I guess. And the other thing I would just say is that it's probably very important for these scenarios to the extent possible, capture market transformation effects, right? We would hope that as we're approaching higher levels of electrification, you'd be moving down the cost curve in a way that would be reflected in the scenario costs. I don't purport to have all the answers to these issues, but I will share some information about that we've seen again in Colorado. There's sort of models like what reducing incentives over time to sort of reflect both this market transformation effect and you know, perhaps the impact of any electrification requirements might be, which you might find helpful.
Thanks, Jim. Any reactions before I just read some chatter in the chat?
Yeah, no, I really thanks for, well, I guess the general conversation thus far is really helpful. And to your point, Cadmus does assume, cost decreases over time and the natural that's included. But you bring up a good point about like, because the costs are going down over time, when we think about other funds, those should also probably be reduced in proportion to that too. So that's something we could consider as depending on, what we pull together. I guess a question back to everyone is if, for this high scenario, if we're not retiring the gas system in its entirety by 2050, you don't necessarily have to force the gas to move customers to move off the gas system as quickly. And so in that world, like the high could be something a little less dramatic to help reflect, maybe a different vision of the lifespan of the gas system for that scenario. I probably just fielded more questions, so sorry.
You're fine. We have 20 more minutes. So before I turn to Lauren, just for folks on the phone, I just want to say Stephanie Chase with Public Counsel wrote earlier that she agrees with Lauren and Summer as well, that a more granular approach to retiring part of the gas system by 2050 would be more helpful. And Ferland then weighs in. He writes, I think studying the fullest extent is useful, as the other scenarios or goals are subsets of the larger goal, less expensive and easier. I think that a more tiered approach, slices of the load at a time, can be incorporated alongside the more aggressive no carbon in the system, which is ultimately a societal goal. So two comments there. And I'll turn to Lauren and then we can kind of batch some responses. Go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I mean, I do think it's still helpful to have a very high conversion scenario. The distinction I was trying to make was the distinction between conversion and retirement. I feel like retiring the system seems to me like it comes with a bunch of other costs that I don't really know we're necessarily trying to capture here. But to me, the word retirement is sort of not planning terminology and I don't really know what it means. So I think if we maybe talk about like how quickly are folks converting, from one side of PSE system, like from the gas side to the electric side, I think that would be helpful. Whereas if we're talking about, we're asking PSE to like shut down its gas business by 2050, that comes with a lot of questions and ambiguity from a planning perspective.
Thanks for that, Lauren. Jennifer, any responses before? I know that you wanted to go through mid and rate constrained in the next 15 minutes or so. So any responses before we let you move on?
Yeah, I guess to Lauren's comment, I think that's helpful. And I guess something to consider for the high could be, I think I mentioned there is an adoption potential that has been identified for the different end use technologies and over time that would theoretically increase based on the incentive level. So we could just assume the 100% incentive, which is covering the incremental cost, and allow that adoption curve to kind of just play out, assuming there's a mandate where like customers would have to select that electric end use instead of a gas replacement, but maybe see where that curve naturally ends instead of forcing it by a certain date, because it is after 2050. So we could see what that is. And then I think the significance of that is like, if you're converting off of the gas system, we do need to account for the cost of that gas system usage decreasing over time and potentially eventually retiring the system in its entirety for like a scenario such as high. So that's also an option.
Thanks, Jen. We'll let you carry on.
Okay, I don't even know where to begin. So another option that we were thinking about was mid. So again, this is looking at end uses, but on burnout. So assuming when a customer's furnace burns out, they would have to replace it with only an electric appliance. That's kind of a question on this mid scenario. If you would want to allow gas replacements, that's something we can discuss. Maybe the incentive impact is looking at 50% of that incentive amount to convert customers and have them choose that electric end use. And the importance of the incentive is it changes the adoption potential. So we do want to, be clear about what we want to assume there. We're looking at the gas asset life, so just the life of the asset over time, just as we normally do in the IRP. Another item which we didn't discuss in the high is looking at no gas conservation for gas appliances. Would be something we could not include. And then no alternative fuels, question mark. We could not include that in the mid as well. Again, we'd be including all the current laws that would support funding for electrification to date, and then we'd identify another bucket of money which would need some funding to accommodate this mid scenario. And then quickly on the low, which is called rate constrained, as we laid it out on a low scenario, we were thinking based on, we've looked at electrification a couple of times, and something we really think there'd be a lot of value in is kind of considering rate impacts and how an end use customer is going to feel through this transition. And maybe it makes sense to align our adoption of electrification with some sort of rate constrained world on the gas system. So saying maybe we can only increase rates by a certain percentage annually to accommodate electrification. And if that were the case, what would that electrification adoption look like? And how would the emission reduction profile look over time? And to do this, we think it's important to continue to invest in gas conservation, because that would in theory, make this process a longer transition, and as well as alternative fuels. But again, we would include all the current requirements for the Inflation Reduction Act and the CCA in this analysis for that piece. Okay, so that's my piece.
Reactions, questions, or thoughts? I think you got everyone excited in the beginning. Oh, good. Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I'm trying to wrap my head around this rate constrained scenario and how that works in your modeling. And I mean, are you running the model for a certain number of years, then checking the cost and feeding that into the next several years? Or I don't know, just help me understand better what's going on with this 5%.
Like how we get there.
Yeah.
No, it's something we've been talking about. I think, it's a bit of an iterative approach. An idea was to start with the gas portfolio from the last IRP and kind of iterate from there, something to start on, because the gas loads and whatnot haven't changed too drastically since the last IRP. So an idea would be to start there. We could also run it and then kind of go back and forth. It's still a question mark on my mind how exactly we'll get there, but we're up for the challenge. Figure it out.
Well, let me clarify. I think that challenge, right, rather than being really iterative, I was thinking something a little more simple, which would just be to say, we're about to file, we'll be filing a GRC, a general rate case, quite soon. We can look at what's the gas revenue requirement. We can just limit that to residential and commercial if that's what we would like to do. And then just say, of the revenue requirement that we've identified, 5% of that, so assume it'd be a 5% rate increase, would create a pot of money that could be used to electrify, to provide electrification incentives. And you would get that amount of money. You could spread it like peanut butter. We could make it bigger per customer if peanut butter doesn't get much of a response, because electrifying your home is very, very expensive, right? So it would be that kind of a scheme where we would be looking at if there was a PSE funded incentive pot of money, how far would that go in terms of stimulating customers to electrify? That's kind of the idea. So rather than try and say 5% every year, but I have a 20-year forecast of revenue requirement, it's not going to be that precise. I think it'd be a little simpler in that way. But that was kind of the idea. Did that make sense? Well, I guess two things. Did you understand that? And did it make sense? Could be independent question. Right?
I think I'm going to benefit from this being recorded and on YouTube for me to watch again, but it helps. And it sounds like, so it's not it's not, well, yeah, I need to wrap my head around this a little bit more to understand. I guess when I was looking at the slide, it was like, oh, okay, a low, medium, high, different scenarios, great. But the top one, I think, is a little more complicated than I expected it to be coming into this. So I might need more explanation in the future to better understand what's going on there. But appreciate you giving it a first whirl, and I'll take a look back at this recording to see.
Great. We're 2 hours and 40 minutes in, so we can timestamp it. Great. Summer, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to see if I understood what you were saying, Philip. The pot of money that would be created, is that created from gas customers? So gas customers are paying a premium to electrify themselves? Or I guess I'm kind of confused about why those dollars would come from gas customers and not the electric side.
They could, absolutely. So I think that's entirely reasonable to ask. Should it, in fact, it's probably a good question is should it be coming from the electric side? And then does it matter if it's an overlap territory or not? We only have 50% of our gas customers are also our electric customers. So I think that's a great question, Summer, is when we talk about this pot of money, should you assume that it's coming from gas customers? Should it come from electric customers? At this point, it would certainly affect electric rates. It would affect gas rates. Not really sure. I think for me that the key was just kind of trying to put some context around what might be considered a reasonable amount of money that ratepayers would be funding to support those the subsidies and the incentives to switch. So just trying to put that into context, right? Because once again, it's very expensive. In the other scenarios, the other two scenarios, we're essentially assuming, I mean, we'll calculate the numbers, right? The costs and whatnot to customers, but we're assuming PSE isn't paying for that, or PSE's customers aren't paying for that. Basically, you're assuming the customer is either paying for it themselves, all of it themselves, or because there's a command and control that would say you can't replace your equipment when it burns out. Well, there's no real utility action there. You just can't replace your gas appliance, right? Again, we can track all those costs and identify them. This one we were looking at really how much can you do with incentives. So just trying to use financial incentives that's paid for by the utility. So maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. Should we be talking about part of that subsidy should be coming from the electric side? And then I don't know what that means for like Seattle, Tacoma, Snowpud. The other where the publics are the electric utility. So not 100% sure, Summer, but it's a darn good question. So what do you think?
It's a good question. Do you want to have yeah, go ahead, Summer.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know if that was to me. I'm soaking it all in. I'll take this back and confer with the team, and happy to provide some feedback and comments. Just trying to understand right now. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, for you, the timestamp is 2 hours and 43 minutes in if you want to replay it. So just a note in the chat, some notes here. We have from Jim. I think gas customers is a reasonable starting point given that it's PSE's gas business that has CCA obligations, Climate Commitment Act obligations, but agree that the allocation of these costs is an area for ongoing discussion. And Lauren says she agrees with Jim. The cost allocation issue doesn't seem relevant to the planning conversation in her point of view. So yeah, Summer has to jump. Thank you so much, Summer. Jen, you have about 6 minutes before we need to give members of the public their opportunity. So what other pieces did you want to cover or ask about?
That's really it. I mean, we haven't talked, I guess, haven't heard much about the conservation assumptions we have on here. If anyone has anything they want to say about that, or any other clarifying questions before we end. So as you guys think about this more, you can see where we're coming from. As you can see, it's really complicated and it's all in the perception and the assumptions. So I really appreciate talking through this. This is helpful. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'll keep us moving to next. Oh, Lauren, I saw you come off of mute. Anything you want to add, Lauren?
No, I was just going to say thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback. It's really helpful.
Yeah. This is definitely one of those like head scratchers. Yeah, this is a lot of food for thought here. So if you could go to the next slide, I'll help wrap us up before we turn to the public. So next slide, please. So the first thing I want to note is I think, Joel, you asked about what are the commitments that PSE has or the goals PSE has with those feedback reports, and we can start adding those here. But I got confirmation that 4 weeks from the meeting is when they want to post the feedback reports. So on February 20th, the feedback form for this meeting closes. And then I wish my calendaring skills were really good, but 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks like around March 12th is when the feedback report should be online. Other things that are coming up at the end of February, there's going to be a webinar, a public webinar. It's an hour and a half with emerging resource alternatives. So 2 kind of separate ideas, but small modular nuclear and then separately alternative fuels. Pauline, if I could ask you to grab that registration link and drop it in the chat in case people want to sign up for that, that would be really helpful. Before we wrap up, I do want to also note that there was a conversation before the break, and I think it was Jim. Someone was asking about the RFP and what size or scale in terms of energy we're looking for. Was that you, Jim, or Joel? I can't remember.
I think that might have been Froylan.
Froylan. Okay, Froy, thank you. So Froy, I think we got an answer for you. I don't know, Ryan, do you want to come off a mute and just share that so he doesn't need to wait for the feedback report? And maybe Ryan left.
Yeah. I can't. Yeah. So the size was from 200 kW to 4.99 megawatts is the exact size.
Oh, thank you.
Great. One last thing to have to wait for the feedback report. Great. And with that, you can go to the next slide. And that takes us to public comment. So I'm going to switch gears. Pauline, if you are able to allow everyone to raise their hand and give us a stack for public comment. As a reminder, like many public meetings with government officials, this is a chance for the public to talk. It's a chance for your voice to be heard. We record all this, but it's not really a back and forth per se. So with that in mind, let me see my participant list. Great. Okay, 3 participants have raised their hand. All right, so we'll do it in the order that I see it. We'll do Don, Jim, and Virginia. So Don, I'm promoting you so that you can talk. Let's see.
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thanks for joining us, Don. Feel free to get started.
Okay. Well, the Washington Clean Energy Coalition appreciates the inclusion of the IAP2 slides at the beginning of each section of today's presentation. We hope there will be more opportunities for the public to participate at the higher IAP2 levels in the future. However, there is still a significant structural issue with public participation. Let's consider the description of the involved level. It says to work directly with the public throughout the process to ensure that public concerns and aspirations are consistently understood and considered. In this meeting, PSE chooses to believe that a dozen people picked by PSE fulfill the definition of public participation. Members of the public like myself, Jim Adcock, Virginia Lohr, and Thomas Kramer, have persisted in our engagement in these meetings, even though we continue to be excluded from asking questions or having useful interactions with PSE representatives and RPAG members. This is not what IAP2 envisions, nor is it the intent of the Washington Administrative Code, which states explicitly that public participation is essential in the development of an integrated resource plan. We continue to ask that this exclusion be lifted. Otherwise, we ask that PSE add an asterisk to every future IAP2 slide, acknowledging that PSE is not actually committed to IAP2 standards of public participation. I am not able to provide all our questions and suggestions that arose during this 3-hour meeting in a 2-minute comment. I will try to submit them in the feedback form, but I note that this is a further impediment to public participation, and we strongly object to the obstacles that are being placed in our way concerning very important issues that impact our communities, our environment, and quality of life for our descendants. PSE can do better. Thank you.
Great. Don, thank you for those comments. And as imperfect as the feedback report tool is, form is, if Pauline, you can just drop that in the chat for everyone, so participants and RPAG members, just because, 2 minutes in a 3-hour meeting, you mentioned there might be some other things you'd like to share. So Don, thank you for those comments. Next, we have Jim Adcock. Jim, are
Yeah, hi. Yeah, Jim Adcock, electrical engineer. It is great that Puget is working on equity aspects, but Puget must also actually work on reducing the use of emitting generation of electricity in order to meet the requirements of CETA to be 80% actually clean by 2030. Currently, Puget continues to rely heavily on gas generation, generating nearly 1,000 megawatts of gas generation, nearly 24/7, 365. Puget talks about safety, quote unquote. It is not safe, quote unquote, to continue to rely on emitting generation, with the Bressler mortality cost of carbon paper estimating 1,400 deaths per year of Puget operation at current levels of carbon emissions. Foot dragging costs lives. You touched on gas storage. In terms of gas storage, I expressed disappointment that Puget didn't learn from the Texas experience a few years ago, and now Puget's Jackson Prairie gas storage facility didn't actually successfully run during recent coldest winter days. This was not a business as usual situation. Rather, Puget took the extraordinary step of asking ratepayers to minimize their use of both gas and the electric for several days, and in fact never actually sent us an all clear back to normal email. So if Puget is going to rely on gas for both direct delivery to ratepayers and to generate electricity, then the gas reliability actually needs to be there. And now, repeatedly, the gas reliability has not been there. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for those comments, Jim. I know that Emily has jotted those down and recorded them. Next, we have Virginia. Virginia, I'm promoting your ability to speak. Can we hear you?
I assume you can.
Yeah, very good. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Virginia Lohr, a PSE customer on Vashon. PSE has responsibilities in different areas. They have responsibilities to generate profits for shareholders and to provide safe and reliable service to customers. But also, as members of a society, they have a moral obligation to consider the impacts of their actions on humanity and the future, which today includes special attention to their impacts on climate change, which is destroying prospects for living creatures around the world. PSE's efforts are easy to check in regards to profit and reliability, but cannot be so readily checked regarding their duty to the future. I do see some signs that could indicate consideration for this moral responsibility, such as PSE's efforts to get House Bill 1589, which would change the gas side of their business, past this session, and their desire to extend the net metering rate for solar through 2025. Such signs of responsible behavior regarding PSE's moral obligation to humanity can be hard to find, and actions that appear mainly to work in the interest of profits and against the moral obligation seem too easy to find, such as PSE building the Tacoma LNG facility without first obtaining building permits, and PSE opposing community solar, which is one of the essential components for distributing reliable power throughout their service territory. To reduce the impacts of climate change, we must do things differently than we have for decades, and we includes PSE. Please remember your moral obligation in all actions you individually promote at PSE. It must not just be about profits and power supply. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Virginia. And I know Emily jotted those down, and I see PSE leadership here listening. So thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Looking at my list for any other hand raises from the other 15 or so people on the line. Well, I'm not seeing anyone else. I'm gonna stop
Also,
sharing
it looks like there is one more from Pete.
Oh, thank you. This is why I have a team. Great. Let me hit my participant. Oh, there we go, Pete. Please, I'm allowing you to talk. Please come on.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Pete Stepani. I'm a customer, and I'm also involved with the Northwest Clean Energy Group. And I just wanted to say that this meeting was incredibly refreshing for me to see such great interaction with the folks that are outside of PSE. And the reason I mention that is because, just like Don had mentioned, that a lot of times it's really hard to have a two-way conversation with PSE. And it's nice to see that it's possible. And it would be nice if there was ways for some of us that are concerned about various issues to actually have more opportunities like this where we can also chat with you. And I also had feedback on the slide where you had the high-low different scenarios, and especially on the discussion about whether it's even useful to have the full retirement scenario. And I agree with Lauren and others that that's probably not very useful because it's not very realistic. But I think the scenario that I would like to see is, and it wasn't clear if the other two really covered this, is given that Bill 1589 is up, I'd like to see a scenario where, there's no new gas hookups for residential and possibly even commercial. And then to figure out what that impact is on you and on the customers, because you're going to start having more, residential pipes that aren't feasible anymore, which means you have to retire them. And I'd like to see what kind of modeling you can do around figuring out what that really does to both PSE and to the customers as far as rates. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. It's nice to meet you and have you join this conversation. Let me look more carefully at my list now. I am not seeing anyone else. Pauline, can you verify that?
I don't see anyone else either.
Very good. Well, I guess oh, there's something in the chat. Let me double check. Oh, that's just what I asked you to put in the chat. Very good. Well, with 3 minutes before the 3 o'clock hour, I just really want to share all the members of the public who did spend 3 hours with us today walking through all this information, as well as the RPAG members who provided a lot of important and constructive feedback, and for PSE for preparing a lot of information for us to digest. So fill out the feedback form and we will reconnect in a few weeks. So thank you all so much.